They put the Luna of the Northreach out into the snow on the longest night of the year, and she was carrying the king's child, and every soul in that courtyard knew it. The king came down to the gate himself. That was the part nobody expected. He did not send a captain, and he did not send a steward. He came down the frozen steps in his own black coat with a folded page in his hand, and he read the words out loud in the voice she had been falling asleep against for 3 years. Banished, nameless, unbound. Her mark struck out of the pack ledger as though it had never been written there at all. And one condition, spoken flat into the cold, that if she ever came back through the gates of Karth, the child would not outlive the walk. She did not scream. She did not go down on her knees in front of his boots. She took the page out of his hand because she was the one who kept the records of that hall, and her fingers still knew what to do with paper. And then she turned and walked out into the whitewood with the snow coming down like ash off a fire. She kept that page for 4 years, folded small, carried against her heart, read so many times the creases went soft as cloth. And in all that time, she never once understood the single thing that was wrong with it. The ink had not smeared. It always smeared. Every letter that man ever wrote her, every treaty, every supply list, every foolish 2-word note left on her pillow, came away with a gray smudge along the bottom edge where his left cuff dragged through the wet words. She had teased him about it for 3 years. She had blotted 100 pages for him with her own sleeve, laughing, calling him the only king alive who could ruin a document by finishing it. That night she looked at a clean page, and she thought it meant he had not cared enough to write it himself. She was wrong. She was so much further wrong than that, and it was going to take her 4 years, a village of bears, a healer's private notebook, and a 3-year-old boy with the wrong face to find out how. Chapter 1. 4 years later, on the far side of the mountains, Ilsa Varn was counting salt. She counted the way she counted everything, out loud and twice, with the stub of charcoal in her right hand and the village ledger open across her knees. 60 crocks in the undercroft, 11 of them cracked at the shoulder and losing to the damp. At the rate Hollowfast burned salt through a mountain winter, that was enough to reach the thaw and not 1 day past it. Hollowfast was going to starve. Slowly, politely, over the course of one ordinary spring. Ilsa Varn was 29 years old that winter, dark auburn hair, the color of wet cedar, worn in a working braid because in 4 years she had not once had time for anything else. Gray-green eyes. The Bear clan of the Cradle called her the counting woman, and they meant it kindly, and she had decided to take it as a title. The rescue is not the interesting part of the story, so here it is quickly. Torvald Sten followed her tracks 9 miles up a frozen creek bed and came over a rise expecting to find a body. What he found was a woman in a snow hollow she had dug herself, with a banked fire and a windbreak of cut pine, boiling bark tea and rationing. That was what he told the village afterward, and it was what made Mother Hedda decide to keep her. She was not dying, Torvald said. She was rationing. 4 years on, Hollowfast bought grain at a fair rate under a written contract, sold hides in 3 valleys instead of 1, and had a ledger that balanced. She had done that. Whatever else had been taken from her, she had done that. And she reminded herself of it on the bad nights, the way other people count breaths. "Mama," a small voice in the storehouse doorway, backlit by hard white daylight. "Mama, Tor says the road is shut." Ilsa closed the ledger before she turned, because a child should not learn to read fear off a page. Bram Varn was 3 years old, and would be 4 at the first thaw. Black hair that would not lie down on the left side, no matter what anybody did to it. Gray-green eyes, exactly the shade of hers. A coat 2 sizes too big, and a half-carved lump of pine in his fist, because Torvald had given him a blunt knife in the autumn, and he had not put it down since. "Which road, little bear?" Ilsa said. "The one with the money," Bram said, with enormous seriousness. "Tor says the money got bigger." Which meant the toll at the Silver Notch had gone up again. Ilsa put her hand on the top of his head and felt, as she always did, the small, cold drop in her stomach that came of looking at his face straight on. Everything else about him was hers, but the shape of him, the brow, the set of the jaw, the flat, serious mouth, that belonged to a man in a hall 4 days east, and every year it belonged to him a little more. They were all in the longhouse when she got there, which told her everything before a word was spoken. Mother Hedda Sten was 66 years old, built like a door, with iron-gray hair cut off at the jaw and black eyes that missed nothing. She had held the Sten clan 19 years, and she was sitting at the head of her own table with a strip of birch bark in her hands. "Read it to me," Hedda said. "You read better than my eyes do." It was a toll notice copied out at the Notch, and it took Ilsa 9 seconds to understand that Hollowfast was finished. "A third," Ilsa said. "1 load in 3, on everything that comes up through the Silver Notch. Salt, iron, grain, seed. Paid at the gate in goods, not coin." Torvald swore in the corner. He was 35, brown-haired and brown-eyed, and roughly the size of a hay cart, and he was a gentleman, so the swearing meant something. "We cannot pay that and feed the herds," said his wife. Runa Sten was 32, blonde braid, blue eyes, herb woman of the Cradle, and the calmest person in it. "We would be choosing which animals to keep alive by the first month of spring." "We petitioned," Hedda said, "twice, sealed by a runner who knows the road. Nothing came back, not a no, not a word." Ilsa turned the bark strip over, and there it was at the bottom, pressed into black wax, and her whole body went still and clear and cold, the way it did when she was about to do arithmetic that hurt. A running wolf, with its head turned back over its shoulder. The seal of Rurik Draeven, Alpha King of the Northreach. "Well," Ilsa said, and heard her own voice come out flat and reasonable. "Then he is doing it on purpose." "The oathing is in 19 days, Hedda said. "The long night. Every 4 years the king stands in his hall with the doors open, and any clan under his protection may put a petition to his face, and by the old law he must answer out loud in front of witnesses. And I have nobody who can stand in a wolf hall and argue a treaty clause without being laughed into the snow." Ilsa was aware of her own heartbeat. She was aware of the folded page in the lining of her coat, where it had lived for 4 years, worn to the softness of cloth. "You have me," she said. Chapter 2. She had 19 days to decide whether walking her son through the gates of Karth would kill him, and she spent every one of them doing the arithmetic. Here was the arithmetic. A man had stood in the snow and told her that if she came back, the child would not outlive the walk. And in 4 years, that man had never sent one single rider after her. Not one. No search, no bounty, no question asked in a market. She had lived 4 days east of his hall under her own name, and nobody had ever come. So either he meant every word and could not be troubled, which matched nothing she knew about that hall, or something in that story was not true. She did not build a hope on it. She only noticed it, the way she noticed a number in a column that would not sit right, and wrote it down in the back of her mind and went on. "Take the boy," Hedda said, the night before they left. "No." "Take him," Hedda said. "You are walking into a hall of wolves to tell their king he is starving a bear village. A woman alone with a grievance is a nuisance. A woman holding a cub is a mother, and there is not a wolf alive who will put his hands on a mother in front of his own pack." "You are using my son as a shield," Ilsa said. "I am using your son as a fact. There is a difference, and you are clever enough to know it. And if I am wrong about this, he pays for it." "Then do not be wrong," Hedda said, and put a hot cup in her hand. "You have not been wrong about a number in 4 years. Be right about this one." They came down out of the cradle on the 9th day of the walk, and Karth came up out of the whitewood the way it always had, gray and enormous, hunched at the mouth of the silver notch with its back to the mountain and its face to the pass. "Who lives in it?" Bram asked from Torvald's shoulders. "A man who owes us a road," Ilsa said, without breaking stride. "Here is a thing about that hall, which a ledger keeper knows and nobody else bothers with. The Northreach kings had never gone anywhere alone. For 6 generations, every alpha king of the Northreach had kept a sworn man called the Second Face. It was not a secret. It was an office, written into the household rolls between the falconer and the master of the roads. The Second Face was a bone mimic, one of the rare ones born able to take a shape they have studied, and his work was to wear the king's shape at treaty grounds, at ambush points, on any road where an arrow might be waiting. The whole arrangement rested on one law of the gift, and it is the reason 6 generations of kings slept easy. A bone mimic must touch the living man to take his shape, and the shape holds a day and then falls off him like wet snow. A mimic cannot wear the dead. Kill the king, and you lose the face forever. Which made the Second Face the one man in the realm who could never profit from the king's death. Ilsa had written that line herself into the household roll in her own hand in the 2nd year of her marriage. She had also written, 2 months before the snow, the death of Cor Ashkin, 4th of that office, killed in an ambush at the Silver Notch and burned where he fell. She remembered that Rurik had not spoken for 2 days afterward, and that when he finally did, it was to say that Cor had been the only man in Karth who never wanted anything from him. She thought of none of that as she walked up the road. It was filed, the way everything was filed, and it would be 4 days before anything reached in and pulled it out. The great doors stood open for the oathing season, as the law says they must, and the hall was packed to the walls when the Hollowfast delegation was let in at the back. And on the dais at the far end, in a chair of black wood with no cushion on it, was Rurik Draeven. Ilsa had promised herself she would look at him like a number. He was 33 now, black hair, longer than he used to keep it, tied back off a face that had gone harder in the jaw. Amber eyes, the pale seam of an old scar through the outer end of his right eyebrow, which she had watched a healer stitch shut while he complained about the thread. A plain gray coat, his mother's ring, and he sat the way he had always sat, too still, one hand loose on the arm of the chair, the left hand. Second knuckle sitting crooked and slightly high, where it had been broken by a horse and set badly when he was 20. She looked at him like a number for about 4 seconds. Then she looked away and put her hand flat on the top of her son's head and thought, with no self-pity in it at all, that she had once been happy in this room, and that whoever that woman had been, she was not coming back. They called Hollowfast forth from the end. It was very late, the fires had burned low, and Ilsa stepped out of the pen with the ledger under her arm and got 9 paces up the aisle before she realized Bram was not holding her coat. He had gone ahead of her. He had watched adults all evening go down on one knee at the foot of the dais before they spoke, and he was a village child, taught his manners very carefully. And there was one thing more, which nobody in that hall could have known. In Hollowfast, when you give a person a gift, you kneel to hand it up. That is the bare custom. Bram had been carving the same piece of pine since autumn. He walked up the middle of the aisle of Karth Hall, small and serious, in a coat 2 sizes too big, and he went down on one knee in front of the Alpha King of the Northreach, and he held up a lumpy wooden wolf in both hands. "For the house," Bram said, in the loud, clear voice of a child who has been told to speak up. The hall did not gasp. That is not what a hall like that does. It stopped. 400 wolves went silent inside the same half-second, and in the silence a green log popped in the fire pit, and every face in that room turned from the boy to the man in the chair and back again, doing the same arithmetic. The arithmetic that takes no ledger and no schooling at all, because the child had her eyes, but he had the king's face. Chapter 3. The king did not move for a long moment. Afterward, people said he went pale, or rose in fury, or shouted for the guard. He did none of those things. Ilsa was close enough to see exactly what happened, and it was almost nothing. His hand tightened on the arm of the chair, the 3 good fingers of the left hand closing, the crooked one staying where it was because it could not close and had not been able to for 13 years. Then Rurik Draeven leaned forward and took the wooden wolf out of the child's hands as carefully as if it were an egg. "Thank you," he said. "What is your name?" "Bram," said Bram. "Bram what?" "Bram Varn." Rurik's eyes came up the aisle and found her, and Ilsa made herself stand still and not go for her son, because going for him would have looked like fear, and fear was the one thing she could not afford in that room. "Hollowfast petitions on the silver notch toll," she said, and her voice carried, because she had spent 4 years shouting numbers across a windy stockyard. "Under the old law, my lord, you have to hear it. I am the speaker for the Sten clan of the Cradle, and I would like my son back now, please." Rurik stood up. He came down the 3 steps of the dais with the wooden wolf still in his hand, and Ilsa held her ground and watched him come, and understood in a distant sort of way that her hands had gone numb. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could smell the hall on him, smoke and wet wool and cold iron, and under it the thing that was only him, which 4 years had done nothing whatsoever to make her forget. "Ilsa," he said, just that, and everything she had rehearsed over 9 days of mountain road came apart in her chest, and she had to reach for the next item on the list. "The toll is 1/3 of every load," she said. "We have petitioned twice and had no answer. My village loses its herds by the 2nd month of spring, and the people who cannot feed themselves will come down into your valleys, and then they are your problem instead of mine. I have brought the numbers. They are correct." He was not looking at the ledger. He was looking at her face like a man reading a road he had once walked in the dark. "You are alive," Rurik said. "I have been alive the entire time," Ilsa said. "It was not difficult. You should try asking." "Sigrid," Rurik said without turning. A woman came off the wall. Sigrid Halloran, shield captain of the Northreach, 38 years old, red hair in a warrior's crop, green eyes, and a nose that had been broken and left that way on purpose. She had taught Ilsa to hold a knife the right way round in the 1st month of her marriage, and had never been sentimental about anything. "The Hollowfast delegation are guests of this hall," Rurik said. "The east rooms, fires lit, nobody bothers them, and if I hear one word repeated out of this room tonight, I will find out who said it. And bring me the toll rolls for the silver notch. All 4 years. Tonight." They gave her the east rooms. She knew the east rooms. She had chosen the hangings in the east rooms. She got Bram fed and washed and asleep, and then she sat on the floor with her back against the door and let her hands shake for exactly as long as she allowed, which that night was about 4 minutes. The knock came near midnight. She thought about not opening it, and then she thought that a woman who had walked 9 days to argue a toll clause does not get to hide behind a door. Rurik stood in the corridor with a lamp and no guard. "Is he asleep?" "Yes." "Then come out. Not in there." They stood in the cold stone corridor with the lamp between them and the wind working at the shutter slats, and for a moment neither of them said anything. 3 years, Rurik said at last. "You were gone 3 years before I stopped having them check the roads." Ilsa felt the floor tilt. "Check the roads," she repeated. "The southern ones, the ferries, every port on the Sarrow." His voice had gone careful. You went south. That is what I was told. That you went south with the farrier's family, and that you left a letter." "I did not go south," Ilsa said. "I went 9 miles up a frozen creek bed in the dark and dug a hole in the snow and sat in it for 2 days." Rurik went very still. "What letter?" Ilsa said. "It said you never wanted the mark on your throat." He said it flatly, the way a man says a thing he has said to himself a great many times. "That you had been sick of this hall for a year, that you would not raise a child in it. It was in your hand, Ilsa. I have looked at your hand for 9 years. It was yours." "I never wrote you a letter." "I know what your writing looks like." "So do I," Ilsa said. "And I have looked at yours for 9 years, and I have carried a page in my coat for 4 of them with your seal on it. So one of us is going to have to be wrong." And she watched a man who had never once in her presence look confused. "What page?" said Rurik Draeven. Chapter 4. She did not show it to him that night, and afterward she was never sure whether that was cowardice or good sense. What she said, standing in that corridor, was that she wanted the toll rolls and the grain contracts and the household roll for 4 years and the record room. "Ilsa, whatever you think I did—" "I do not want to talk about what I think you did," she said, "at midnight in a corridor 9 feet from where my son is sleeping. Give me the records and give me 3 days, and then I will tell you. That is the best offer you are going to get, and it is a great deal better than the one I got." He took it. He did not raise his voice, did not tell her what she owed him, did not use 1 inch of the enormous power he had in that building. "You can have the record room," he said. "It is exactly as you left it. Nobody has been in it." And he walked away down the corridor with the lamp, and she stood in the dark for some time after that. Nobody had been in it. She opened the door the next morning onto dust and old vellum and the sourness of iron gall ink, her chair pushed back at the angle she had pushed it, a stack of unbound sheets in her handwriting running out mid-line on the entry for the winter fodder, and a cup with 4 years of dust in the bottom. She worked. It was the only thing that had ever helped, and she was good at it. On the second day, Sigrid Halloran came up with a tray of food she had clearly taken off somebody else, and sat on the edge of the table, which she had always done and which Ilsa had always hated. "I am going to say one thing and then leave you alone. When they told us you had gone, I did not believe it. I said so out loud, in the war room, to his face." Ilsa put her charcoal down. "What did he say?" "Nothing. That is the answer. For a month he said nothing at all, and then one morning he came down and told the hall you were not to be spoken of, and we all decided that was a proud man being proud." Sigrid looked at her steadily. "He put riders on the ferry roads for 3 years, Ilsa, out of his own household money, because he did not want it in the rolls where anybody could laugh at it. He came into the war room every 8th day for 3 years and asked if there was word, and every 8th day we told him no." "And in 4 years," Ilsa said, "did he ever once send anyone up the notch? North, into the mountains?" Sigrid frowned. "No," she said slowly. "Why would he? You went south." "Yes," said Ilsa. "Why would he?" She was still there at dusk when a wood carrier came in with an armload of split birch for the little iron stove in the corner. She barely looked up. A nondescript man of middle years, mid-brown hair going gray at the temples, brown eyes, the kind of face that slides off you before you have finished seeing it. He stacked the wood, checked the stove, and went out. She did not think about him. Nobody ever did. That was the entire point of him. She would remember him later. Twice in 3 days, both times just after the king had walked past the buttery stair, both times carrying wood for a stove that was already full. That evening, Rurik came to the record room himself, and Bram, who had decided something about him on the first night, walked straight over and held up both arms, and Rurik picked him up one-handed and awkwardly, the way a man holds a thing he is afraid of dropping. Bram immediately took hold of his left hand and began, with intense scientific interest, to try to fold the fingers down. "That one is broken," Rurik said. "Why?" "A horse stood on it when I was 20. "Can you make a fist?" Bram demanded. "No," Rurik said. "Not with that one. I make a very bad fist. It goes like this." And he showed him, 3 fingers curling, the crooked one riding high and useless, and Bram laughed like it was the finest joke he had ever been told. And Ilsa Varn sat at her own old table, with a charcoal stub in her hand, and felt something move at the back of her mind, something enormous and slow, like ice shifting on a lake in the dark. She did not know what it was, not yet, but she stopped writing. Chapter 5. She did not sleep that night, and by the gray part of the morning, she had stopped pretending she would. She lit the lamp and took the folded page out of the lining of her coat and laid it flat, and for the first time in 4 years, she read it as a document instead of as a wound. She understood something then with a kind of clinical horror. In 4 years, she had never once read that page. She had held it and unfolded it and looked at the shape of it and let it hurt her. That is not reading, and a ledger keeper knows the difference. So she did it. The seal was his, not a copy, not a cast, the true die, because the running wolf carried the small nick in the shoulder it had picked up in the 3rd year of his reign when a clerk dropped it on the buttery stair. She had recorded the damage herself and judged it too small to recut, and the ink had not smeared. Ilsa sat very still. The bottom line ran clean across the sheet and stopped, and beneath it lay 3 fingers' width of blank vellum, unmarked, the color of old cream. Rurik Draeven was left-handed. His hand dragged after his pen, and it dragged through wet ink, and it left a gray smear along the bottom of every page he ever finished, and he had never once managed to stop. She had teased him for it and blotted for him, and once, in the 2nd year, kissed the inside of his wrist where the ink had gone. She had looked at a clean page in the snow and thought, he did not even care enough to write it himself. She had been holding the proof in her hand for 4 years. She got up so fast the stool went over. He was in the war room, because he was always in the war room before dawn, and she went past 2 guards who knew better than to stop her, and put the page down on the table in front of him. "Read it," she said. Rurik looked at the page, and she watched a man's face go from stone to something else entirely, and it took about the length of 1 breath. He picked it up. His hand was not steady. "Where did you get this?" "You gave it to me," Ilsa said. "You came down the steps at the north gate on the longest night 4 years ago and read it out loud in front of the gate watch and put it in my hand. It says that if I come back through those gates, my child does not outlive the walk. I have carried it for 4 years." Rurik Draeven made a sound she had never heard out of him and did not want to hear again. "I was not at the north gate," he said. "On the longest night 4 years ago, I was at Greyfell, 4 days east. Sigurd was with me, and 40 men were with me, and it is in the campaign roll in your own record room, in your own handwriting, because you wrote that roll before He stopped. "Before I vanished," Ilsa said. "Yes." "It is your hand," Ilsa said. "It is your seal, and it is the true die, because the nick is in it." "I know." "And I believed it." Her voice cracked for the first time in 4 years, and she hated it and kept going. I want you to understand what I am telling you. I did not run from a page. I ran because you stood in the snow and told me to my face. I looked at you. You were an arm's length away. You had the coat. You had the scar. You said it in your voice, and you did not blink when you got to the part about the child. Ilsa. So do not tell me I should have known, she said, because I have spent 4 years telling myself exactly that, and I would like at least one of us to be honest this morning. Rurik set the page down very carefully, as though it might go off. I am not going to tell you that, he said. I am going to tell you that I have been searching the wrong road for 4 years, and that the letter I was given was in your hand, and that I looked at it exactly the way you looked at this, which is to say, not at all. Then he said, Show me the bottom edge again. Ilsa turned the page around. He looked at the clean vellum under the last line for a long moment. Then he laid his own left hand flat on the table beside it, the crooked knuckle riding high, and the cuff of his sleeve was gray with old ink, the way it had been gray with old ink every day of his adult life. I have never in my life finished a page and left it clean, Rurik said. No, said Ilsa, you have not. And there it was, out loud, in a cold room at dawn. The man in the snow had not been him. She put both hands flat on the table because her knees had stopped being reliable, and said the next part slowly, working it out as she spoke. Whoever it was had your face, and your voice, your coat, your scar, your hand on paper, and the true seal die out of a locked room in this building. That is not a mask. I was an arm's length away in lamplight. That is not a man in a mask. Rurik had gone the color of ash. No, he said, it is not. There is one thing in the world that does that, Ilsa said. There is one office in the world that does that, said Rurik, and I buried him. Chapter 6. They went down to the record room together in the dark and lit every lamp in it, and that is where the story turned over. Ilsa found the household roll for the 22nd year and read the entry out loud, in her own handwriting, in the room where she had written it. Cor Ashkin, 4th of the office of second face to the House of Draeven, sworn at 19, served 18 years. Killed in the ambush at the Silver Notch on the 11th day of the frost month. Burned where he fell, brought home wrapped. 18 years, Rurik said, with his back to her. He was sworn into this house when I was a boy. He wore my face at 9 treaty grounds and took an arrow meant for me at 2 of them. And I have never once been able to describe him to anybody. I could not tell you the color of his eyes. Brown, said Ilsa. Rurik turned around. Mid-brown hair, Ilsa said slowly. Going gray at the temples. Brown eyes, a face that slides off you before you have finished looking at it. There is a wood carrier in this hall who looks exactly like that. I have seen him twice in 3 days. Both times he came up here with an armload of birch for a stove that was already full. Both times within a few minutes of you walking past the buttery stair. Rurik did not answer. He sat down on the edge of the table, which she had never once seen him do. A bone mimic must touch the living man, Ilsa said, every time, within the day, or the shape falls off him. Yes. He has been inside this building for 4 years, carrying wood, brushing your sleeve on a stair, and not one person in this hall has looked at him, because nobody looks at the man who brings the wood. Nessa, Ilsa said, and stood up. Nessa laid him out. They woke Nessa Coldwater at the 4th hour of the morning, 58 years old, silver hair pinned up with a piece of wire, brown eyes, a hand like a farrier's. She came without a word of complaint, and she brought her book. She keeps a book on every body she has ever laid out and trusts it further than she trusts herself. 11th day of the frost month, Nessa read. Male, burned. Brought in wrapped in oiled hide off the Notch Road. She stopped. Read the rest, Ilsa said. Both hands whole. That is what I wrote. Both hands whole, 10 fingers, nails present. She looked up over the top of the book with an expression that was beginning to be frightened. And underneath, in my own hand, query the little finger. Say it plainly, Nessa, Rurik said. Kor Ashkin lost the top joint of the little finger on his left hand in the 3rd year of your reign. A door on a supply cart. I took that joint off myself, and I bandaged it 11 days while he complained about the smell of the salve. Her mouth had gone tight. I wrote query because the body had 10 whole fingers, and I could not make it agree with what I remembered. Then I told myself I was old and had misremembered, because memory is a liar, and I closed the book. That was not Kor, Rurik said. That was not Kor, Nessa agreed. I do not know who that was. I know it was not him. Ilsa was already moving along the shelves. She had gone somewhere very cold and clear and useful, which is where she always went when a column would not balance. And she pulled down 4 years of requisition books and opened the first one. A room, she said, when Rurik asked what she was hunting. He has been living in this town for 4 years without a name. Living costs money. Wood costs, bread costs, a roof costs. If he has drawn on your name for any of it, it is in one of these books, because everything is in these books. That is what these books are for. She found it on the 2nd night, at the 9th hour, with the lamp guttering. Ashen Row, she said. The old creamery, requisitioned in the king's name for the storing of hides 2 winters running, renewed this autumn, sealed and entered by nobody. There is no name in the clerk column at all. She looked up. The Northreach has not stored a hide at Ashen Row since your grandmother sold the tannery. It is a stone building with a cold cellar and no window, 4 streets from this hall, and somebody has been paying to keep it for 4 years. Rurik was already reaching for his coat. No, Ilsa said. He stopped. Think. You cannot walk into that building. You are the one thing in the world he needs alive and close, and there is not a lock in Karth strong enough to hold a man who can walk out of it wearing the face of whoever is guarding him. If he takes you, the next man in that chair is him, and there will not be one soul in this hall who knows. Rurik stood there with his coat half on. Then what? He said. Then we do the one thing he cannot beat, Ilsa said. The oathing is in 3 days. The doors are open. The law says you have to stand in that room in front of the whole pack and answer out loud. That is the one place in the world where he cannot be a wood carrier, cannot slip out a side door, and cannot be somebody else tomorrow. We do it in front of 400 witnesses, with the ink and the hand and the finger, and we make him prove it himself where every one of them can see. Rurik looked at her a long moment across the lamplight. You have been doing this in your head all night, he said. I have been doing this in my head for 4 years, Ilsa said. I have only just found out what it was. She lay awake that night beside her sleeping son and put it plainly to herself in the dark. The man she had hated for 4 years had never wronged her, and the man who had was still walking around inside this building wearing his face. Chapter 7. He moved before the oathing, of course. She had said he would, and being right about it was no comfort at all. The next morning the king came down to the hall an hour late. Ilsa was at the long table with Bram beside her, and a bowl of barley porridge going cold in front of her. And she watched him come in through the north door and cross the floor to the dais, and she felt the whole room tip. Nothing was wrong. That was the horror of it. Nothing at all was wrong. The black hair, tied back, the gray coat, the scar through the outer end of the right eyebrow. He walked the way Rurik walked, heel first, unhurried, the walk of a man who has never once had to get anywhere quickly. He sat down with one hand loose on the arm of the chair. "Bram," she said quietly, "go and find Runa, right now, please, and stay with her, and do not come back into this room until I come for you." "Why?" "Because I am asking nicely, and the next one will not be nice." He went. He was a good child, and he could hear the difference. Then Ilsa Varn stood up and walked the length of Karth Hall with her heart going like a bird in a box, and stopped in front of the dais and made herself smile. "My lord, the Hollowfast petition. You said you would give me an answer before the long night." He looked down at her, and there was warmth in the look, real warmth, and it made her skin crawl. "Luna," he said. One word, 2 syllables, and every hair on her arm stood up, because in 9 years, in that hall, in that bed, in a snow hollow at the end of the world, he had never once called her by her title in a private sentence. It was not a thing he did. He called her Ilsa in front of the pack, and Varn when he was teasing her. And when it was only the two of them and the lamp was out, he called her first Ice, because of the way she went still and clear before she said something clever. He had never in his life called her Luna. He was still talking. She caught some of it. The toll would be reviewed. The Hollowfast delegation should go home to the Cradle at once, with an escort, the roads being what they were at this season. "Of course," Ilsa said. "My lord is very kind." And then, keeping her voice light, "Would you hold this a moment?" And she held out her ledger, and he took it out of her hand. With his left hand. All 4 fingers closing round the spine. A clean, ordinary, working grip. "Thank you," Ilsa said, and took it back and walked out of that hall at a completely normal speed and got around the corner of the buttery stair before she had to put her hand on the wall. She found Sigrid Halloran in the armory and told her in 11 sentences, and she has said since that the finest thing that ever happened to her in that building was that Sigrid did not argue for 1 second. "Where is the real one?" "Ashen Row, the old creamery." "Then we go now." "No." Ilsa took hold of her arm. "If we take that building this morning, we get Rurik back and we lose Kor. And Kor with a face is a man who can walk into any room in this realm for the rest of his life. He gets away, and he comes back in 5 years wearing somebody we love." Sigrid's jaw worked. "And if it goes wrong, the Northreach spends 30 years under a man nobody can name." "Then it does not go wrong," Ilsa said. "The oathing is tomorrow night, and he has to be in that hall. It is the entire reason he has waited 4 years. The oathing is where the pack binds itself to the king out loud, and he has spent 4 years hollowing that man out so that when he finally stands up in that room, there is nobody left close enough to see it." "You were always the most frightening person in this hall," Sigrid said. "I never could get anybody to believe me. Elder Osric calls the order of the petitions. I will have him put Hollowfast last, when the doors are shut and the hall is full." That night, Ilsa sat on the floor of the east room with her back against the door and the folded page open on her knee for the last time. She thought about a man in a black coat at the north gate, saying words in a voice she loved, and she understood at last that the voice had not been lying to her. It had simply not been his. And she thought about the other one, 4 streets away in a cold stone cellar with no window, kept alive because a face is no good to anybody once it is dead. 4 years, she thought. 4 years of my life and 4 of his, and he has been in the same building the whole time, carrying wood. She folded the page and put it in her sleeve. Chapter 8. The long night came in hard and clear, with a sky full of stars and the cold falling like a stone, and by the second hour after dark, Carth Hall was packed to the beams. Every clan under the Northreach was in that room, shoulder to shoulder in the aisles, with their breath going up into the rafters. The great doors were shut and barred from the inside, which is the custom, so that the pack and the king are sealed in together for the length of the rite. Cor Ashkin sat in the black chair, wearing Rurik Draeven's face, and he had been sitting there 2 hours, answering petitions with patience and good humor, and he was very, very good at it. 22 years standing in another man's clothes, with nobody looking at you, she thought. And you got very good at it, and not one of them ever said your name. Elder Osric called the last petition of the long night. Hollowfast, he said, in a voice that carried better than a deaf man's had any right to. Of the Sten clan of the Cradle, on the toll at the Silver Notch. Ilsa walked up the aisle of Carth Hall for the second time in her life. She stopped at the foot of the dais, and she did not kneel. My lord, Hollowfast asked that the toll at the Silver Notch be struck out and the winter road opened, on the terms in this grant. I have written it out fair. It needs your hand and your seal. And she held up a single sheet of vellum, and in her other hand a pen. There was a small ripple through the hall, because petitioners do not hand the king a pen. Cor smiled down at her. It was a good smile. It reached the eyes and everything. You are bold, Ilsa Varn. I am cold, and I have walked a long way, Ilsa said. Sign it, my lord, and I will go home. And he took the pen. He signed it, left-handed, carefully, in the king's hand, exactly as he had signed 2 toll decrees and 1 banishment. And he blotted as he went, the way a right-handed man taught to write left-handed has to blot, because otherwise he cannot see what he is doing. Then he held the page out to her. Ilsa took it. She turned around slowly, so the whole hall could see, and lifted it above her head. Look at it, she said. 400 faces looked at it. There is no smear, Ilsa said. The hall did not understand. She could feel it not understanding, a great confused weight in the room, and she raised her voice and put the flat working edge into it, the one she used across a windy stockyard. Rurik Draeven is left-handed. He has been left-handed for 33 years, and his cuff drags through his own wet ink, and he has never, in the whole of his life, finished a page and left the foot of it clean. Ask the clerks, ask the treaty men, ask any one of you who has ever taken a written order out of this hall with a gray smudge across the bottom of it, and there are 200 of you in this room. The man in the chair had stopped smiling. That is a thin thing to build an argument on, he said. Ink. Then I will build it on something else, Ilsa said. My lord, make a fist. With your left hand, in front of everyone here, make a fist. And he did not move, and that was when the hall began, in earnest, to turn. Because Elder Osric Vane took 2 steps forward off the dais, 70 years old and white-bearded, and said in a voice like a door closing, He cannot. He has not been able to since he was 20. A horse stood on that hand in the yard of this house, and I carried him in to Nessa myself, and he has never closed it since. Osric turned to face the hall. But this one took my arm 3 days ago on that stair, with that hand, whole grip. I felt it, and I thought nothing of it, and I have thought of nothing else since. He took my ledger yesterday morning, Ilsa said. Same hand, 4 fingers. He carried a shield in the yard at midwinter drill, said Sigrid Halloran from the aisle. Left hand. I remember thinking he had got the strength back. He held a cup at the 3rd table on the 11th night, said Nessa Coldwater, with all 4 fingers round it, and I am an old woman and I said nothing, because who argues with the king about a cup? And one by one, out of that packed hall, people began to say it. A stable master, a treaty clerk, a cook. Small, stupid details, 4 years of them, everyone noticed and set aside and forgotten, because nobody in this world calls the king a liar about his own hand. Ilsa turned back to the dais. "You have worn him for 22 years, she said. "You wore him at the fords, and at the ambush at the Silver Notch, and at the North Gate on the longest night 4 years ago. And you have never once been able to wear the hand, because the gift takes the shape of a man and not the years of him. You can be the face, you cannot be the horse." The man in the black chair looked at her, and something behind his eyes let go, and it was like watching a lamp go out in a house across a valley. "You were the only one," Cor Ashkin said. 22 years in this building, and not one of them ever looked at me long enough to know me. Not one. I have carried wood up that stair 400 times this year, and been thanked twice." He turned his head slowly and looked out over the pack of the Northreach. 400 of them, every one frozen where they stood. "You could not tell us apart, any of you, in 4 years." "I could," Ilsa said. "That is why you put me in the snow." "Yes," said Cor, and then he stood up out of the king's chair, and the face came off him. It was not dramatic. That is what everybody said afterward, and it is why so many of them dreamed about it. There was no flash and no smoke. He simply stopped, the way a man stops holding his stomach in, and the black hair went mid-brown, and the shoulders came down 2 inches, and the scar closed up like water, and standing on the dais of Carth Hall, in the king's grey coat, was a nondescript man of 41, with brown eyes and a face that anybody in that room would have walked past in a doorway. And on his left hand, the little finger ended at the second joint. Nessa Coldwater made a small sound. "Cor," said Elder Osric. "You do know my name," Cor said. "How nice." Then he ran. He got 4 steps. He went straight for the low door behind the dais that leads to the buttery stair, which was exactly the door Sigrid Halloran had spent the afternoon putting 3 of her people behind. They put him on the floor. It took 4 of them. He did not fight well in the end, because he had never once in his life had to be anybody who fought well. The hall came apart into noise, and Ilsa heard none of it, because she was already moving down the aisle, shoving through wolves twice her size, with the signed grant still in her fist. "Ashen Row," she was shouting, "the old creamery on Ashen Row, the cold cellar, take the door off it, go now." She got there ahead of them, through 4 streets of frozen Carth in a coat she had not fastened, and she was first through that door with a lamp somebody had shoved into her hand. The cellar was under a trap in the back room, cold enough that the walls had gone white, with no window and a chain through a ring in the floor. Rurik Draeven sat against the wall, with his coat gone, and a wolfsbane fog in him so thick he could not lift his head properly, and it took him a moment to find the lamp. "Ilsa," he said. "Yes?" "You are not real," he said, quite reasonably. "You went south." "I did not go south," Ilsa said, and got her arms under him. "I went 9 miles up a frozen creek bed, and then I went up a mountain, and then I came back." Chapter 9. They brought him up out of Ashen Row in the last hour of the long night, and the Northreach watched its king carried through its own streets by 4 bearmen from a village he had been quietly starving for 2 years. And there is no version of that night in which anybody comes out looking dignified. Nessa had him for 6 days. Wolfsbane does not kill a strong man, but it takes its rent, and he was sick and shaking and useless for the first 3, and Ilsa did not go in. She spent those days in the record room instead, because working was still the only thing that had ever helped. She went through 4 years of the outgoing register line by line with Sigrid and a clerk and a pot of tea, and they made a list. 2 toll orders on the Silver Notch that had starved the Cradle, 1 banishment, unregistered, unsealed in the book, existing nowhere in the world but in the lining of a woman's coat. An order of exile against the farrier family of the Lower Sarrow, the Aldrins. 7 people put out of their house in the second spring to make Cor's story about the southern road hold up. A broken salt treaty with the river packs. 11 small, unexplained gaps in the king's own household money. And, in a locked box in the cold room on Ashen Row, wrapped in oilcloth with 9 others like it, a letter. It was addressed in Ilsa Varn's handwriting to Rurik Draeven, sent down from Hollowfast in the second winter by a salt runner who was paid in advance and who had done his job perfectly. It had never been opened. Somebody had put the king's seal on it in black wax and written the single word, "No," across the front and sent it back up the mountain. Ilsa had held that return letter in her hands in Hedda Sten's kitchen 4 years ago and had stopped, at that moment, being a woman who was waiting for anything. She brought it to him on the 7th day. She put the letter in his hand. "I wrote to you," she said, "in the second winter. I want you to have it, and I want you to know that this is the one I am angriest about, and that it is not even your fault, and that I am angry anyway, and I would like you to sit with that." Rurik looked at his own seal on the front of it, at the word, "No." Then he opened it, 4 years late, and read it. It was not a long letter. It said that she had a son. It gave his name and the date of his birth and the color of his eyes. It said that she did not want anything and would not come, and that she thought a man should know, and that she hoped the roads were kind that year. It was written the way she wrote everything, flat and clear and correct, and at the bottom, where a smear would have been on his page, there was a small blot where something had fallen on the vellum before the ink was dry. He read it 3 times. Then he put his hand over his eyes and sat like that for a while, and Ilsa stood at the window and let him, and did not say one kind thing, because she was not ready to, and she was not going to lie about it. "Ask me for something," Rurik said at last. "I do not want anything from you." "I know. Ask anyway." So she did. She had thought about it for 6 days, and she had a list, and she read it off a page, because that is who she is. The toll struck out, and the winter road opened that season, not in the spring. The Aldrins found, brought home, and paid for 4 years of a life they did not get to live. The salt treaty renewed with the river packs on the old terms, the shortfall made good out of the king's own money and not the packs. The office of the second face abolished by written law, forever, and every man who had ever held it entered in the rolls under his own name. All 4 of them, including the 3rd one that Elder Osric could not remember. And her son's name in the pack ledger, not as an heir, not yet, and not for a long while, and not until he was old enough to be asked. Just in the book, as a person, with 2 parents named. Rurik agreed to all of it before she had finished reading, which annoyed her, and she told him so. He did not take the oathing. The long night rite had been broken in half by a man on the floor of his own hall, and by the old law it could be held again inside the month, and Rurik Draeven stood up in front of the pack of the Northreach on the 3rd day of the new year and declined it. He said that a king who could be worn for 22 years by a man whose name he had never once said out loud was a king who had not been looking at his own house. He said the pack should sit with that for a season and decide whether they still wanted him. He said that until they decided, Sigrid Halloran and Elder Osric would hold the hall between them, and that he would not be in Karth while they said it, because a man standing in the room is a thumb on the scale. Then he went up the mountain. He came to Hollowfast in the worst month of the year, with 2 men and a pack pony, and presented himself at the door of Mother Hedda Sten's longhouse. And Hedda looked him over for a good long while, and then told him the salt road had washed out above the 3rd bend, and that they were short of backs. He was there the whole winter. He hauled stone. He rebuilt 11 rods of the salt road with the bare men and split his hands open doing it, because a king's hands are soft in the wrong places. He sat at the end of Hedda's table every night and got the same bowl as everybody else, and when the cradle put its questions to him, and it had a great many, he answered every one of them out loud, including the ones about the 4 years. He did not sleep in Ilsa's house. He did not ask to. He did not touch her once that entire first month. And after a while, she began to notice that she was extremely aware of every foot of distance he was so carefully keeping, which she understood eventually was not an accident. And he learned his son. That is the thing the cradle still talks about. Not the king on the road crew, the man in the woodshed in the afternoons with a 3-year-old, teaching him the difference between cutting with the grain and cutting against it, and being corrected at length by Torvald Sten, who did not care in the smallest degree who anybody's father was. "He turns 4 at the thaw," Rurik said one evening, on the bench outside, with the cold coming down. "I missed all of them." "Yes," Ilsa said. "I am not going to ask you to say it is all right." "Good," said Ilsa, "because it is not." They sat a while, with the mountain going blue. "I searched the wrong road for 4 years," Rurik said. "That part is his, but I stopped searching in the 3rd year. And that part is mine. Nobody made me stop. I stopped because it had begun to hurt more to keep asking than to be finished, and I chose the easier one. And I have thought about it every day since you walked into my hall." "I did not come back either," she said at last. "I could have tested it, any year, sent a rider, sent a lawyer, sent anything. I had a page that said my child would die, and I decided that was the end of the world, and I built a whole life at the top of a mountain rather than look at it again." She let out a breath. "We were both very brave about everything, except the one thing." "Yes," he said. "He counted on that," she said. "That is what I keep coming back to. He never needed us to be stupid. He only needed us to be proud." The winter turned in the 2nd week of the 2nd month, the way it does in the cradle, all at once and with no warning, and the thaw water came off the high rocks in a roar that woke the whole village. Ilsa went out at first light to look at the salt road, because she was the counting woman, and somebody had to say whether the rebuilt section had held. It had held. Rurik was already standing there when she came over the rise, filthy to the elbows, looking at 11 rods of wet stone with the particular expression of a man who has never before made anything with his hands that stayed where he put it. "It held," she said. "It held," he agreed. And then Ilsa Varn, 29 years old, who had planned every single thing she had done for 4 years, did something entirely unplanned. She crossed the wet stone and took a fistful of his coat and pulled, and he came, and she found that he was shaking, and that so was she, and that neither of them was cold. There was nothing careful about it, and nothing practiced. It was 4 years of a thing that had never been allowed to finish, arriving all at once on a mountain road in the noise of the thaw, and afterward she could not have told anybody how long they stood there, only that her hands had gone into his hair, and that he had said her name against her mouth twice, badly, like a man who had been carrying it too long. "First ice," he said when he could. "Say it again." He said it again. She took him home up the path to the little stone house with the crooked chimney that she had earned herself. The fire was banked, and the shutters were still shut against the cold, and Bram was 2 doors down, asleep in Runa Sten's loft, where he had been since the night before, because Runa Sten misses nothing. Ilsa shut her own door behind them and put her back against it. "I am not going to be careful with you," she said. "Good," said Rurik. The lamp went out some while after that, and stayed out, and the thaw water ran under the window all night, and there is not one more word of that which belongs to anybody but them. The pack of the Northreach sent word up the mountain 9 days later. They had sat with it for a season, as he asked. They had argued about it in 400 kitchens, and what came up the road was a folded page in Elder Osric Vane's shaking hand, which said in about 11 words that the Northreach would have Rurik Draeven and no one else, and would he please come home before the roads got worse. Underneath, in a different hand, Sigrid Halloran had written, "Bring the counting woman. The treasury is a disgrace." Epilogue. Cor Ashkin never wore another face for the rest of his life. He was tried in the open hall at Carth in the spring, under the old law, and it took 4 days because Ilsa Varn insisted that every single thing he had done be read out loud and entered, item by item, in the register where it should have been in the first place. He denied none of it. He was, at the end, almost eager to hear it read, which a great many people found the most disturbing part of the entire affair. He was not killed. Ilsa asked for that specifically, and it caused an argument that lasted most of a night, and she won it the way she won things, with a piece of paper. Cor Ashkin is alive today in the stone keep at Greyfell, 4 days east, where he has a room with a window and books and a fire, and where he will stay until he dies. The one thing written into his sentence at Ilsa's insistence is that every guard, every warder, every servant, and every visitor is required by law to greet him by his own name, out loud, every single time they come into the room. He has been called Cor Ashkin more times in the last few years than in the whole 22 before it. Whether that is mercy or the cruelest thing anybody ever thought of is a question the Cradle still argues about at the long table, and Ilsa has never once given her answer. The office of the second face was abolished by written law on the first day of that spring. It was drafted in the record room above the buttery in a woman's flat, clear hand, and its first page, bound in at the front, is the banishment decree itself, unburned, with the clean bottom edge, so that anybody who comes after can see exactly what a face is worth in that house, and exactly how it was caught. The 4 men who held the office are entered in the rolls under their own names. The third one turned out to be called Aldous Herrick, and it took Ilsa 11 weeks in the old rolls to find it. The toll at the Silver Notch was struck out before the first thaw. The winter road up to the Cradle is open all year now, kept by the Northreach at the Northreach's expense. And there is a stone shelter at the third bend for anybody caught out in weather, with a badly carved wooden wolf on the mantle of it, because Bram insisted. The Aldrin family were found in the 2nd month, living in 3 rented rooms above a rope walk on the lower Sarrow. Their house was returned, their ferry rights restored, and they were paid for 4 years out of the king's own money. The eldest Aldrin daughter runs the ferry now, and is said to be even ruder about it than her father was. Rurik Draeven and Ilsa Varn were married at the oathing that was held in its proper place, on the long night at the turn of the year, in a hall with the doors open and every clan in the Northreach inside them. She wore no crown, because the Northreach does not use one, and she came up the aisle of Carth Hall the same way she had come up it twice before, on her own feet, at her own speed, carrying paper. Bram Varn Draeven was 4 that winter, and he did kneel at the throne again, because he had been told about the first time and had strong opinions about doing it properly. He handed up a second wooden wolf, considerably better carved, with 4 working legs. The first one has never left the arm of the black chair. There is a worn patch on it now, where a man's thumb goes. They live in both places, and that was Ilsa's condition, and she did not bend on it. Carth, from the frost month to the thaw, because a king has to be where his people are in the hard season. The Cradle, from the thaw to the leaf fall, in the little stone house with the crooked chimney, which has been extended twice, and now has a second chimney that is also crooked. Bram grew up between a wolf hall and a bear village, and considers this entirely normal. and at 9 years old, he could balance a herd ledger faster than any clerk in Carth, which his mother pretends not to be smug about. Mother Hedda Sten held her clan 9 more years and sat at the king's own table at every oathing until the end, in a chair she complained about. Torvald and Runa Sten have 4 children, and the eldest is called Ilsa, and nobody asked permission. Sigurd Halloran is shield captain still, and has never once let the king forget the shield in the yard at midwinter drill. Nessa Coldwater died at 79 in her own bed, with her book stacked beside her. And the 11th one, the laying out book, sits in the record room at Carth under glass, open at the page that says, "Query the little finger." Elder Osric Vane lived long enough to hold his king's daughter, who was born on a spring morning in the cradle with a great deal of noise, and who is called Hedda, and who has her father's black hair and her mother's gray-green eyes, and, according to everybody who has ever met her, the temper of a small weather event. And the ink. Rurik Draeven still finishes every page he writes with a gray smear along the bottom edge, and he has never made the slightest effort to stop. And in the Northreach, it is now the way you know a document is real. Clerks check for it. Treaty men look for it. There is a line in the trade law about it, drafted by the Luna of the Northreach in her flat, clear hand, which says that any order out of Carth Hall arriving clean at the foot shall be held and questioned. She wrote that line herself. She says it is the best piece of law she ever made, and that it cost her 4 years and a mountain, and that she would rather have had the 4 years. But she has the rest of them. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Ilsa made the Alpha King wait out an entire winter hauling stone in a bear village before she gave him any answer at all. And some of you will think that was fair, and some of you will think she should have made him wait a great deal longer. So tell me which side you land on. And you have to pick one. Let me know in the comments. I read every one. If you'd like more stories, there are plenty more on the channel. Much love, Sophie.